Capaldi month, eh? Has it really been 10 whole years since the 12th Doctor was vomited onto our screens? Yes, we know he technically debuted the year before, shush. And in honour of this super special occasion, I honestly didn't even know if I was going to say anything at all. Helps to be brutally honest, I guess. Yeah, something you may have noticed about my output on the Whoniversals is that I don't tend to discuss Doctor Who after 2010 very often, and there's a pretty good reason for that. I don't like it very much. Doesn't matter who's in charge, whether it be Moffat, Chibnall, or Russell T Davies' grand return, my overwhelming response to the vast majority of it is apathy? Yeah, let's go with that. There's a few reasons for this, and the most major of them will be relevant in this video, so I'll explain it later, but regardless, I mostly just find these periods of the show to be an overall deflating experience in the most unengaging of ways. Yes, there is potential, as there is in almost anything if you dig deep enough, but for the most part, I simply do not get satisfaction from the final result, either as entertainment or as media to be critically deconstructed. Now, I am including the 12th Doctor era in this, and I am fully aware how that's become something of a hot take these days. At the time of its airing, Capaldi's 3-season stint seemed to be rather divisive at best and pretty ignorable at worst, at least in the eyes of filthy casuals. But in the years since the curtain closed on this era, it appears to have received a degree of re-evaluation and something of a cult following, with many viewing it as a highly underrated period of storytelling for Doctor Who. An innovative, character-driven art house contemplation on the meaning of identity, morality, mortality, and responsibility to a fatigued and introspective Doctor. And I'm not gonna step on that. If you dig the 12th Doctor era, then good on you. If anything, I honestly kind of envy you. I was really rooting for this era when it first started, so trust, no one is more disappointed by the fact that I just don't get on with it than, well, me. But as I said, there's still some things I can appreciate about this era, hell, all of these eras really, but in the 12th Doctor's case, he has one significant positive that punches through the thick, cynical layers of my cold, dead heart. So, ain't Bill Potts just great? Full disclosure, I was not inclined to like Bill at first. When they dropped that infamous introductory clip of hers a year ahead of her run, I was less than impressed. The impression I got from it was that she was going to be the revival's answer to Dodo. Just this overly perky, skin-deep, oblivious dork only there to serve as comic relief ? And since I find Moffat's comedy to be frustratingly smug for the most part, that wasn't a prospect I found value in. This typo didn't help either. Neither did the series trailer after that year's Christmas special.
I'm Bill. I serve chips.
I'm Bill. I serve chips. Really giving us strong reasons to be hooked on this new character, aren't you? I admit I didn't watch any of Series 10 as it was airing. I was already pretty disillusioned with the current iteration of the show at the time. But after glowing recommendations from friends of varying different tastes, I decided to sit down and watch the pilot. And when I came out the other side with The Doctor Falls, I realised that I had just watched my favourite companion character since the 2000s. There have been other elements from this period of the show that I used to like, but my enthusiasm for them has since died. But with Bill, my fondness for her has remained relatively strong to this day. Let's explore why. So with Series 10 framed as something of a soft reboot for Doctor Who after years of ever-increasing overcomplexity, it needed an effective method of reintroducing the world of the show in an accessible way to hook newcomers and alienated viewers alike. So it opted for the Series 1 approach of an audience surrogate bystander who becomes the new companion. Enter Bill Potts, catering staff and wannabe student at a university which the Doctor is now tutoring at. Sneaking into his lectures and demonstrating an eager approach to challenging ideas all sealed the deal for the Doctor to establish a connection and enroll her as his student. And let me just say, Bill fits the role of a fish out of water audience surrogate like a glove. She's very engaged in the world around her, articulate and expressive in her perspectives and reactions, and her warm and affable demeanour is just the icing on the cake. Bill was also, well, billed as someone who'd think more outside the box and make different kinds of observations than most in her situation. Admittedly not really an original idea on Moffat's part, both Amy and Clara were also established with this tendency.
Smaller on the outside.
Okay. That is a first.
But in their cases, it barely ever seemed to come up again, and only felt like it was there for their funny punchline. Whereas with Bill, this trait has been much more ingrained in her personality and character, being consistently demonstrated from her first appearance to her last, and almost always being fairly naturally expressed too. Thankfully, her introductory clip was just an extremely over-exaggerated example. And as a result of this atypical approach to deduction, Bill challenges the Doctor in an endearing and fairly idiosyncratic way, which marries up well with the eager tutor-student bond established between them. Oftentimes, especially towards the start of the series, when establishing their rapport is the highest priority, it takes the form of a more casual, low-stakes back and forth concerning Bill processing elements of world-building and whatnot, almost teasing the Doctor with the conclusions she reaches in some cases. But when the tension rises and circumstances become more personal, it can make for some great explosive conflict between the two. I'm certainly not gonna say it's the most revolutionary character dynamic you've ever seen, but it's well done. Of course, another aspect to Bill is her domestic life. Firstly, her unconditional love for the dead mother she never knew and confiding in her idea of her as a source of wisdom, which adds a touching extra dimension to her character from which some moving emotional moments sprout. And honestly, it's probably through this side of her where Bill's optimistic outlook shines the brightest. Secondly, there's her love life and yearning for social acceptance as a lesbian, which, as a wholesome homo myself, I dare say was treated with a surprising amount of respect and care. Let's just say Moffat hasn't exactly been the most tactful with exploring this subject in the past. A few people, particularly at the time, made the critique that Bill constantly stopped the plot dead to shove her sexual orientation in the face of every character and the audience, and if we pretend like this is good faith criticism for a second, did you not consider the context of why she brought it up? Almost all instances of her specifically clarifying her orientation are in direct response to other people imposing their assumptions about it onto her, something that a lot of LGBTQ+ folk experience in their daily lives due to the heteronormative culture we live in. Moffat took great care to ensure that Bill clarifying her existence was narratively justified, a fact supported by how she's clearly frustratedly closeted to her estranged foster mother, so of course she'd want to seek out understanding from elsewhere. In fact, I dare say a yearning for acceptance is probably the most prominent motivating factor behind Bill. Admittedly, it's not the most intricate message for a character ever, but it's not nothing either, and it makes for a surprisingly poignant basis for her tragic turn in the series finale, when someone so summery, so joyful, so confident in who she is and eager to prove herself both intellectually and personally, is forced through the trauma of being converted into a Cyberman. Yeah, this might be one of the most harrowing moments of this franchise. It hits like a ton of bricks. Not gonna say it's the most emotionally resonant moment of the show per se, but it is the only time I've ever straight up cried during Doctor Who, so yeah.
I don't want to live if I can't be me anymore.
Cyberconversion has always been an allegorical exploration of transhumanism taken to the hypothetical extreme where all of our limitations are removed at the expense of everything that makes us, well, us. It's an intensely thought-provoking idea that's still relevant today, but putting a lesbian person of colour through this process weaves in another layer of social commentary about racial and LGBTQ+ oppression in particular. The erasure, suppression, and in extreme cases forcible conversion of minorities, being made to conform to a rigid template of person that they don't want to be because it's simply not them. This is why Bill's cyberconversion is a botch job that leaves her aware of her humanity, so that you can truly get an understanding of this allegory from her perspective. It's also why I've never really minded that she gets her happy ending, because either way I think her journey here is profound. Her being stuck as a Cyberman forever would certainly heighten the tragedy of the aforementioned commentary, but her being freed from these constraints by another lesbian communicates the power of LGBTQ+ solidarity in the face of injustice, in a way that is narratively justified by how Heather's pilot powers had previously been established to work. It's a win-win either way as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, that's the basic gist of why I think Bill's neat. But the question remains, what is it that makes her my favourite companion since the 2000s? Alright, I guess we're doing this. So, the thing about Bill that appeals to me personally is the fact that she works. She actually functions. So, I could make a whole video on this topic, but to keep it brief, by far my main problem with Doctor Who in the 2010s and beyond is that I find the majority of it to be highly arbitrary. Not really evolving naturally based on cause and effect progression, but more on a saying it makes it so approach. The narrative will often insist on a particular state of affairs to be the case, whether in terms of plotting, world building, or characterization. But then the way in which these elements have actually been established or are functioning won't line up with this smoothly, or at worst flat out won't support it at all. Your plot device may have a totally different impact on surrounding events than your story had specified, or a character might behave or be motivated in ways contradictory to their development for no clear reason. This disconnect gets dealt with in one of two ways. The first is, it just gets outright ignored entirely and you're expected to do the same. The second is lampshading by dialogue that acts as if it's resolved the issue, when it really hasn't, because what's being said has no basis in the story's internal logic. Now, before you say it, yes, this is not the first time Doctor Who has had these kinds of problems. Of course it isn't. But I think the frequency and the severity of it drastically increased starting with Moffat's tenure and is still highly prevalent to this day through Chibnall and Russell, becoming such a persistent long-running issue to the point where I struggle to buy into really anything significant the show does, because so much of the time it just feels so unearned and clunky, and I just find it lame and not a particularly satisfying approach to storytelling. And where major characters are concerned, the different doctors, the companions, the recurring villains, the supporting characters, I struggle to buy into them because they all operate in this unnatural way. Except Bill. In contrast to so many other characters before and since, Bill seems largely spared from this recurring issue. This may be due to how brief her time on the show is, or how the soft reboot framing of her series resulted in a more minimalist approach to plotting for the majority of her episodes, so less contrivances ended up affecting her as a result. But as far as I see it, she actually is internally consistent. As I've explored throughout this video, how she behaves and the actions she takes naturally line up with who her character was established to be and how she internally functions. She doesn't just contort into whatever the narrative insists, regardless of whether it fits her or not, and that is so satisfying. And on occasions during her run where something happens that doesn't entirely add up, it's not necessarily intrinsic to her, which is more than can be said for a lot of her peers. This is why she stands out to me, even if she's technically not the most artistically crafted, because in a sea of characters whose developments and motivations I'm perpetually questioning due to contradictions in their construction, Bill is a character who I can actually deconstruct, follow, and understand. And how apt for a character who revels in figuring out how the world around her is supposed to work. My themes, you could say. There's certainly more I could go into, like her bickering sibling-like bond with Nardole.
What are you doing? It's me, Nardi!
Classic. But in brief, that's why I think Bill is based. I considered having that the title of this video, but I already have a video called Based Under Siege, so I've already played that trick. So, yeah. Happy Capaldiddle, Stan Knock Knock, I don't know. being made to conform to a rigid template of person that